I want to turn and talk about the what is happening. There are just quite a few developments on the impeachment effort, and I want to mention that these are, there's so many things we could spend show after show after show with all sorts of detail about what's happening on the impeachment front. But I just want to mention a few of them. Number one, tomorrow, Thursday, Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, is introducing her resolution in the House. She's not introducing a resolution to move forward with a formal impeachment investigation. She won't do that for the two reasons I've mentioned before. Number one, she does not want to force people who are Democrat members of the U.S. House to have to vote for it when they are from districts that support President Trump. And number two, if there's a formal inquiry process, a formal investigation, she and the Democrats would have to give President Trump due process. They'd have to agree, for example, he can cross-examine witnesses, or his attorneys can cross-examine witnesses. They'd have to agree that he could call witnesses himself, that he or his team had the power to subpoena documents. They want to deprive him of all due process rights in this witch hunt lynching. They want to make it impossible for him to even present a defense in the House. On a particular note, just to be clear about this, what's happening on this resolution, it was released to the public, just one little piece of this resolution. The actual House resolution that the Democrats are going to push through tomorrow specifically deprives Republicans of the power, the ability to issue subpoenas in this process. You have to understand, I know the term lynching was offensive to some people. I thought it captured exactly what this is. They want to be the accuser, the jury, the judge, and the executioner on President Trump with no basic acknowledgement of his rights, his due process rights, to question witnesses. So get just that little piece straight. They want to hold an impeachment inquiry and not even allow Republicans to subpoena witnesses. Second point that happened just in the last day, Representative Scalise, you may recall his name, Steve Scalise. I think he's the ranking member. He's a Republican member of Congress. He burst out of after a hearing, which is not really a hearing, it's one of those secret held in the basement, people aren't allowed to come to, the non-transparent process being conducted by the House Intelligence Committee, chaired by Adam Schiff. Scalise left that meeting and came out and said to the press, and then later tweeted about it, that when Republicans in this hearing it was their turn to pose questions of this star witness, we'll talk about in just a moment, talk about him, but Schiff said that the Republicans were not allowed to ask those questions, essentially directed the witness to say, you don't have to answer those questions from Republicans. Schiff is basically saying we can ramrod this, whatever word you want to use, railroad President Trump. We can call witnesses up here, we can hear their testimony, and the Republicans cannot even ask questions. This is so far beyond the pale, so far out of line, and we can't in this country, whether you love President Trump, hate President Trump, have no opinion about President Trump. It's the process that is despicable, cannot be permitted to continue. On the particular witness I wanted to mention who was there yesterday, this has gotten a lot of press about. I just want to mention a few things about this gentleman. His name is Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Vindman, Vindman. He was born in the Ukraine. He is American. He speaks fluent Ukrainian. He is an American who's in the military. He won a Purple Heart. He's an actual patriot. He served in the military, so you got to give him credit for that. So Vindman is a member of the National Security Council. He was called before the super secret meeting with the public cannot be allowed to watch and Republicans cannot ask questions to testify before the House Intelligence Committee. Vindman basically said he was in the Situation Room during the call between Trump and Zelensky, and so he actually heard the call and felt troubled afterwards that his perception of the call was that maybe people in the Ukraine would feel arm twisted a bit by President Trump. That wasn't his word. But the point is, the Democrats have come up with a witness now who is saying, I heard the call, and I was uncomfortable with the impression it left that maybe this was kind of a quid pro quo. So Vindman's there to validate the Democrats' whole basis for impeachment, to say actually, and I want to just read you some of the language, his language, what he said about it, because one more thing about how this whole process is so cooked up before I get to what he said. So Vindman, all this super secret process, no one's allowed to hear anything, no one's allowed to read anything, no one's allowed to ask questions, but somehow the New York Times got a hold and announced they had a copy of Vindman's statement, his formal written statement turned into the House Intelligence Committee. Now, the public doesn't get it, but that got released to the New York Times, and they ran with it. And so they're basically saying, he said, this is what Vindman had to say. I'm just telling you, the whole process is cooked up between the Democrats and the media. But here's what Vindman had to say. I'm a patriot. I'm going to say it's my sacred duty and honor, blah, blah. I did not think it was proper to demand that a foreign government investigate a U.S. citizen, and I was worried about the implications of the U.S. government's support of Ukraine. So to be clear, he's not saying it was a quid pro quo. He's not really adding anything new to what we already knew from what President Trump released when he released a transcript of the call. All we have that's new is a person who serves on the National Security Council being troubled by facts that we already knew, having perceived that as a quid pro quo. So Vindman, by the way, is a guy who has, as I say, he's Ukrainian. He's had various involvement in our government. And to be fair, again, he served in the military. He won a Purple Heart. He also, though, testified that when he was concerned about this, what he overheard, he actually reported it to the General Counsel for the National Security Council. The question, supposedly, that Schiff was trying to ask in the hearing where he was cut off, what Steve Scalise was trying to ask of Vindman during the hearing where Schiff cut him off was, who else have you told? Who else did you tell that you were so concerned? And that was a question Schiff would not let Vindman answer. The reason being, Vindman apparently, through many unnamed sources, told a lot of people. He talked about it. This is not a guy honorably doing his duty, stepping forward confidentially and talking to the National Security Council. This is a guy who's been telling people what he thought about this whole process and being apparently, allegedly, perhaps in violation of his commitment to be discreet in the National Security Council. You just can't go around blathering things. As a little interesting aside, one of the staff members on the National Security Legal Counsel team is Vindman's twin brother. So he told his brother and the team that he didn't like what President Trump said. So let me just say, benefit of the doubt, assume this guy Vindman has no axe to grind, no political bias, no bad motive. He just didn't like the tone of this call. We still haven't learned anything new than anything we didn't know already before. We've learned someone's perception, but the Democrats are kind of jumping up and down, acting like they sure got the upper hand now. But I want to go to there are other pieces of the Vindman story that make people more and more nervous about him. I'll plant one more seed with you about him now. He worked for and served in the United States in the Ukraine. He actually said he was approached by the Ukrainian government to ask him how they should deal with Rudy Giuliani's questions to them. Now, you might think that's innocent, say, well, okay, he's Ukrainian, they're comfortable with each other. It's not his job. It's not his job when he's over in the Ukraine representing America to help the Ukrainian government negotiate against the interests of the United States and Rudy Giuliani, who was there on behalf of the president. This is a guy who has maybe an agenda is too strong. He certainly has a bias. He was certainly willing to help the Ukrainian government understand how they could deal with and pretty much put down Rudy Giuliani. This entire impeachment process began, as you're about to hear from a statement. I have a couple little clips to share with you. Hear from a statement that was actually made by the otherwise not that impressive Senator Mitch McConnell. But this has been an effort, a decision that the Democrats made from the moment they learned that Hillary actually lost the election. We're going to find some way to get this guy. They had the Mueller investigation. They had the Russia hoax. They finally had the Mueller investigation after years and years and millions of dollars saying, you know what, there isn't a darn bit of evidence of this whole Russia-Trump collusion. Then they tried obstruction. Obstruction fell on its face. And then they tried the whole, had affairs and paid off people to be silent. And that didn't amount to anything impeachable. Nancy Pelosi has jumped on this because it is something she thinks she can make it sound to the American people, something kind of complex. Maybe people don't understand. Maybe they don't really have a sense of what's right and wrong in this context. Maybe people will just agree that the Democrat mission in this particular case is really protective of America because people don't feel sure about this area of law and kind of whether Trump had the right to make those kind of statements. But I'm going to tell you something. Until you hear Nancy Pelosi and every Democrat in the entire Congress and Senate demand that Joe Biden drop out of the presidential race because he's on tape bragging about his arm twisting of the Ukrainians and explicitly telling them, I'm going to withhold $1 billion of U.S. aid unless you fire this prosecutor who is looking into my son's company. You have him on tape, and you have yet every Democrat in Washington somehow is on the mission to remove President Trump, and crickets about what Biden did. And even to the point, not just crickets, some of them leaping to Biden's defense. Things like, well, no one even liked that prosecutor. A lot of people thought he was out of line. This would be, if you did this in a parody on Saturday Night Live or in a book, you'd think that's absurd. No one would be so audacious, so intentionally hypocritical to tell the American people every day, staring at the camera, this is a serious offense. And actually, Nancy Pelosi recently said, by the way, it isn't really just a conversation one day with Zelensky on the phone. It's actually a series of conversation and events that we're going to put together, all together constituting a quid pro quo. Even she's kind of acknowledging this whole thing with the phone isn't working. This conversation isn't enough. They're out to get the president, and they're trying to bring him down over something the entire country knows. Joe Biden, still the leading contender for the Democrat presidential nomination, admitted about and bragged about on an open microphone. We played the clip enough in the show. I won't play it again. But this, you cannot lose steam on this, people. I feel like there are so many Republicans who think, okay, we're in such turmoil in Washington. So much is happening. So much is we're in such a state of turmoil that maybe we just have to give in, let them impeach him and move on. We cannot do that. We cannot get there with that. And the reason is not just, as I say, because President Trump hasn't done anything wrong. It's because if we surrender the idea that the impeachment process can be used to simply remove a president who drives the other side nuts, who's accomplishing an agenda the left doesn't like, we have simply surrendered the constitutional protections we have in this country for electing our government, the democratic republic we have. Two last points on this story I want to hit. I have some clips I sent to the very wonderful Derek. He does have them. Yes, he's shaking his head, filling in for Matt, who's on vacation. So, Derek, I first want to play. There was a clip, actually, I know I sent you several of them. I want to play the one that was the first one of Senator Mitch McConnell. And this is Mitch McConnell you can see he's in the Senate chamber. He's in the hallways in the Senate. And to quick back up and tell you, Senator Lindsey Graham, who has somehow emerged with the backbone recently, came up with a resolution about a week ago that essentially said to the House, we, the senators, denounce this impeachment inquiry process. It's out of line. You shouldn't be doing this. So in this press conference, Senator McConnell was asked, well, how can you possibly consider yourself unbiased? How can you possibly sit in judgment on a jury if it gets to the Senate, if the House impeaches, it gets to the Senate, since you signed on that resolution? Now, this is, again, for Derek, the wonderful clip 2.
You signed on to Lindsey Graham's resolution about the House impeachment process. You talked about how we're going to have, respectively, an impeachment trial here, and you will be sitting as jurors. How could you be perceived as being a fair jurist if you signed on to that resolution condemning the House impeachment process?
Yeah, the resolution is about due process, and it was critical, at least at that moment. We'll see what the House comes up with later today, about the way they were going to handle the case. Didn't deal with the merits, dealt with the process.
So I will give Senator McConnell, at least he had a good answer. He came right up with it and said, oh, that was about process. We don't like your process. Now I want to go to Senator Lindsey Graham. This is clip 1. Senator Lindsey Graham, who I was extremely unimpressed with during the presidential campaign or pretty much his whole career. He somehow emerged as a stronger leader. He came up with a resolution. Here's a clip of Lindsey Graham talking about President Trump and the impeachment process.
I have introduced a resolution today with Senator McConnell, and the purpose of the resolution is to let the House know that the process you're engaging in regarding the attempted impeachment of President Trump is out of bounds. It's inconsistent with due process as we know it. It's a Star Chamber type inquiry, and it's a substantial deviation from what the House has done in the past regarding impeachment of other presidents.
Okay, this is pretty good. This is Lindsey Graham actually saying, being pretty strong, saying this process is flawed, and we're going to point it out. Back to McConnell for a moment. He was asked a little bit after that, well, who are you to advise Nancy Pelosi? Pretty much, why doesn't the Senate mind their own business? To which he said, we go back and forth all the time. They give us advice, we give them. Well, please spare me. He's pretty strong on that. But then I want to go back to McConnell now, and this is clip 3. He's asked essentially about how can you possibly be unbiased? And here we have McConnell, one last clip.
Well, look, impeachment, as a practical matter, is whatever a majority of the House decides it is at any given moment. And it appears that the Democrats, emboldened by the new majority they've had this year, have been on this path for 3 years. The first headline I saw, I think it was in the Washington Post, before the president was sworn in, was that the impeachment process is beginning. So this is just further evidence that this is what they had in mind from the very beginning.
So McConnell at least had the clarity to say the Democrats have been talking impeachment since prior to the time President Trump was even sworn in. Not the opening statement in that clip, the House impeachment process is whatever the House says it is. No, actually, these are not the words, they're not the voice of a leader, of a person who's willing to say, who lives in Washington, who sees what the Democrats are doing, who sees what happened to President Trump and the whole Trump-Russia collusion. It was a very weak need. Well, whatever the House says, we need more leaders in the GOP, in the House, in the Senate, denouncing not just the procedure, which is bad enough, denying someone due process, but the very substance of the accusations against him. Contrasted with Lindsey Graham, I didn't catch a clip on him, but Lindsey Graham wrapped up a press conference the other day with the statement, there will not be one vote among the Senate Republicans to remove President Trump because he did nothing wrong. These are the kind of statements we need from Republicans in the House, in the Senate, pretty much saying we're not going to play this game with the Democrats anymore. We're going to stand up. When Mitch McConnell stands there and says, well, impeachment's whatever the House says it is, maybe procedurally that's true, but it is incumbent on people like him to call out the Democrats for engaging in an impeachment process on a frivolous, unserious accusation, on a clearly just hypocritical calculation that President Trump should be removed for being accused of doing what Joe Biden did and is, beyond reproach, not to be questioned, not to be condemned. We need people in Washington pointing that out. When people like Mitch McConnell, he needs to up his game on that.